One of my Twitter friends said that his teacher once said jokingly, begin trills on the auxiliary if the music critic from the newspaper were in the audience. Play the appoggiaturas on the beat if the same critic were still in the audience. And I thought that was really good. It was meant to be a joke, but it kind of illustrates the situation if you're not familiar with classical music. There are some die-hard devotees of upper note starts to all Baroque and early classical trills. This is a Scarlatti Sonata. If you see ornaments like these, how would you play them? This piece is currently set for the ABRSM Grade 8 piano exams. Would you go number 1? Or number 2? Let's have a look at the Alfred edition of Scarlatti Sonatas. In the introduction, the editor gives an overview of how Scarlatti's ornaments must be played, and it says the trill begins on the upper auxiliary and it must have at least 4 notes. It continues to explain that their instructions don't conflict with C.P.E. Bach's famous essay, and the practice had been well established throughout Europe for many years. In the Baroque time, this sign was interchangeable with a longer trill sign, so according to this instruction, the answer to my earlier question would be number 2. But I told my student to start the ornaments on the main note when she did her grade 8 exam. Some people can have a really strong opinion on this. I can see why that is, because there are many influential music treatises written in the 17th and the 18th centuries, and the French theorists such as Cooper and Rivard, they were very consistent about starting each trill on the upper note. But Domenico Scarlatti was Italian who went to live in Spain. Could it be that Maestro Domenico didn't have the internet and he wasn't aware of what was going on in France or in the north of Germany? Have a look at this another sonata by Scarlatti. This piece has several trill signs, and sometimes he added an appoggiatura before the start of a trill, and sometimes he didn't. If he thought it was normal to start on the upper note, why would he add these little notes? I think it's so much easier if there are a handful of rules to follow, like all Baroque and early classical trills you begin on the upper note. But that's so oversimplified. You need to make a musical decision for different situations, and I want to show you in this video some of the things that can help you make that decision. I mentioned earlier that the French theory books were very consistent about starting each trill on the upper note. What about Italian theory books, you might wonder? What did they say? What about J.S. Bach, who was of course German? Knowing historical facts help you make an informed decision. I made a bonus feature at the end of this video. If you're interested in what I've found, if you want to know more about the history of ornamentation, please watch until the end. But for now, I'm going to show you some musical examples, and yes, we are going to come back to the grade 8 Scarlatti Sonata. And in case you wondered, does it matter if you start the trill on the upper note or on the main note? Who cares? I think there's a great pleasure and enjoyment in obsessing about stuff that no one cares about in the outside world. I'm going to show you some of the situations in Baroque and early classical music where you might decide to start the trill or proud triller on the main note and not from the upper auxiliary. Number 1. Trills approached by descending stepwise motion with a slur. Have a look at this Haydn example. The melody is going down in step and there is a slur. And this was particularly important after a dissonance when the trill is on the note of resolution. This is dissonant and resolution. 4/3 suspension. Because the legato link between a dissonant note and the resolution was fundamental in classical music, you don't want to start the trill on the upper note and play the B flat again. That would break up the legato link, so start on the main note. Here is another example from Bach. Number 2. When there's no slur, but when the melody is going down in step. Even when there's no slur, I would often omit the upper note if it's provided by the previous note, particularly if the passage is legato in character. You want to avoid note repetitions to preserve the flow of music. Number 3, when it is important to maintain clarity of the line. This is Mozart Rondo in A minor, and you have this tune. You have a trill here, and if you start from the upper note, it kind of makes it pretty. Surely you want to hear. Starting on the main note. For the same reason, I would start the chains of trills on the main note to strengthen the impression of the melodic line. Number 4, when you want to emphasize a leap in the melody. By the way, to write it out in large notes like this, it's very Frescobaldian. Number 5, to retain the rhythmic character. Going back to the Scarlatti Sonata I showed you at the start of this video, the reason I begin on the main note is that because this piece is marked alla breve and allegro, so it's a quick piece counting 2 in a bar, and it's difficult to play if you are having to play 4 notes and to count 2 in a bar. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. I think it slows down. It retains the rhythmic character, the dancing character of this piece so much more if you begin the ornaments on the main note. By the way, if you are playing the Scarlatti Sonata for your grade 8 exam, don't worry whether you are starting the ornaments on the upper note or on the main note like my student did. She did very well. What matters is the quality and the conviction of your performance. The main thing is that you make a decision based on your musical judgment rather than blindly following some standardized rules. The musical character must come first, and the ornament must adapt itself to the flow of music. To finish, I want to quote C.B. Bach, who wrote one of the most important Western treatises on music. Having spent 70 pages on how to play ornaments and sounding pretty dogmatic and pedantic, he says, play from the soul, not like a trained bird. I think it's just lovely, isn't it? And trying to find a preference for that particular composer certainly helps, how he or she used to play the ornaments, and by doing so you will find that ornamentation in classical music is so much richer than can be explained away by a few set of rigid rules. Ornaments in music are as varied as life itself. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you. Bye. In the 17th and the 18th centuries, Italy was the leading musical country in Europe. It seems that traditionally the mainstream way of starting a trio in Italy was to start on the main note. Frescobaldi and his students wrote out trills in full using large notes, so we know how they used to play them. Instructions by other Italian theorists such as Cavalieri, who wrote the first known table of ornaments, or Vincenzo Panerai, Caccini and others, the trill also began on the main note. But the Italians were never consistent like the French were. There is this annoying case of Tartini, who states in his violin tutor book that the trill should begin on the auxiliary, yet in his letter to Signora Maddalena Lombardini he calls for the main note trills. As the 18th century progressed, the practice of beginning the trill on the auxiliary became a more popular choice even in Italy. Several Italian authors, including Clementi and Geminiani, demanded this execution, but in Clementi the proud triller always began on the main note consisting of 3 notes. J.S. Bach is said to have preferred the French way of playing the trills, particularly in the late years. When he wrote an ornamentation table for his son, Wilhelm Friedmann, the trill started on the upper auxiliary, but even in Bach there are many exceptions. The German style was very much a mixture of Italian and French influences and their own German traditions. Be very suspicious if anyone makes a sweeping claim such as all 18th century trills start on the upper auxiliary and it was well established throughout Europe. That's not true. There were different traditions and practices depending on where the composers came from. You could say that the French trill beginning on the auxiliary gradually gained the upper hand, especially in the second half of the 18th century. Things do get easier in the 19th century when the musical world began to agree on the meaning of ornament symbols as a result of the international spread of the most common editions. In the course of the 19th century, the trill starting on the upper auxiliary went out of fashion. わかった? Oh no.
Exception.
You know, I didn't say the all 19th century, did I?